Welcome back to Streamline Entertainment. It's Marvin. We're just gonna go through a MWT video, and he's talking about the case. This was on the 26th of the 6th, 2024. So it was quite early on in the case. He actually was over there, but some of the stuff he said didn't actually make sense, and I'll explain why. Let's get straight into this.
In here and worked with the family. I spent yesterday with them and the night before. They are a very, very united family. They are very supportive, and their one mission, of course, is to find out what happened to Jay. They still live with the hope that Jay will return and that he is not safe but still alive. The position for myself is that I come over here to investigate. They have sat with me and they have provided me with an in-depth insight into what has happened in the hours leading up to Jay's disappearance.
So they've sat with him, possibly Brad, Lucy and Brandon, and maybe a few other friends, and basically I think told him a load of wallop. Because like I said, he didn't even know who Abe was at that time. So maybe, I reckon Lucy or Brad told Mark that we didn't know who these two men were that Jay went off with, because they wanted to keep these men from Mark not knowing who they was. But like I said, I think Mark found out through the Guardia Civil, because they had already gone, you know, they'd already had left before Mark had got out there, so he didn't know what they really was. But like I said, I think he investigated it, because maybe what they wanted is for us to not know who actually Abe was, who Jay was with at the Airbnb. That's a massive possibility as well, which obviously it didn't happen, because the Guardia Civil would have had to interview him if he was the last person to see Jay Slater.
I have today been able to speak to a large number of witnesses who were with him or came across him during that period of time, and they have all been helpful. There are two key people to date that I have not spoken to, and these are the two men that took Jay back to that holiday rental.
At that time, it didn't look like to me he had any names of who this person was. That tells me whoever we were speaking to, whether it was Lucy, Brad or Brandon, they didn't want to give him that information. And he probably went back to them and said, look, if you don't tell me what this person's name is, then I'll have to call this guy out. I think for some reason, Brad, Brandon and Lucy were scared of the two men's names being brought out. And that tells me they were wrapped up in something that they shouldn't have been.
In the hills. Those two men have spoken to the police, but they are now back in England. I need to speak to those people. Those people have crucial information. There will be you as well as many other people who are asking very pertinent questions in relation to why are they here, what were they doing, why did they take Jay back to that holiday rent.
There you go. It just sounds very, very suspicious very, very early on, and then done a U-turn later on in the case, saying that it was a tragic accident. You know, you've got to stay in your lane sometimes, and when you chop and change, people stop believing in you, in what justice you're trying to get out of this. You know, I think I do think he's got some information that basically we may not know about, because like I said, it was said by Ali yesterday that he thinks she saw NWT somewhere. Basically probably in a message or something, that NWT doesn't believe what Ophelia says. But like I said, I think MWT probably went a bit quiet, because like I said, he realised he was taken a ride by Lucy and Brad, especially Lucy, I think, because I think she's the sort of chief manipulator.
I know the name of one of those individuals, his nickname. I do not know the name of the other person. I do have a photograph of that one person. I do not intend to release that photograph yet. But if they do not come forward, I will release that information and ask the public to tell me who they are. So I urge them to come forward before I do that. And the only reason I'm doing that is I believe they have crucial information that may enable us to find out what is happening.
We move on to part two. This is After Dark Coffee and Crime. Do go and follow her. She's absolutely brilliant. And this is a change of thought by Mark Williams Thomas about the case. Let's get straight into this. It wasn't what he was originally saying. Was he told that he's got to be careful in what he puts out there? Seems like it to me.
But not once there did he say there's going to be a terrible accident. It's likely that there has been a terrible accident. No reference to any accident.
We have, however, ruled out hostage kidnapping situation because no credible ransom demand has been made. And we've no evidence.
How does he know that? How the hell does he know that when he's not really looked into that? I just think a lot of this has just flown over his head.
At this stage to say there was a third-party criminal involvement in Jay's disappearance. However, there are still a number of outstanding actions, and therefore we still remain open-minded to the possibility of this changing.
So here in this video, we hear Mark Williams Thomas excluding a hostage situation. We also hear him say that there's no evidence to suggest a third-party involvement, but
he did say that that could change. So what's changed his mind from what he was talking about at the start about criminal involvement? He was the one that basically got this case, sort of us thinking that there's something sinister. And it's only when we started looking into it, we realised there's more to this than meets the eye, and that Jay didn't just have a tragic accident.
Suggesting that Jay was running away from something, or he was scared of something. So although at this point he says that they remain open-minded, so we'll give him that, he doesn't actually say at this point it's very likely that Jay has had an accident. Not in any part of this conversation he's having in front of his camera does he say from the outset that this is likely to have been a terrible accident.
Is therefore most likely to be in or around the mountains. We suspect some distance from the last phone location drop. Even after extensive searching done by highly experienced personnel, the rugged and dangerous areas, it's just not possible to rule out that he isn't still there. We've still not found evidence of a third-party criminal involvement in Jay's disappearance, although we have opened up links with dangerous criminal underworld of drugs and associated crime. We have a number of outstanding actions that still require completing and remain open-minded.
So this is a section from his, I think it was his third video that he had posted, and here he is talking about Jay having not been located, that it's rugged territory, that they can't rule out that he's still there. Not one point did he say from the outset that this was a terrible accident. And then there's that reference to that underworld that he's been in contact with, and that they're not ruling anything out and leaving those breadcrumbs for people to lap up and literally continue to chew over this case. And it's those types of comments that he has left, including the fact that Jay left the Airbnb scared, that has led to other people on TikTok.
And wasn't he the one that said apparently Jay had 2 knives on him? That doesn't make sense to me. And like I said, I think that was a narrative his friends gave to NWT, that he was actually scared about something, that technically Jay put his life in his own hands. Don't forget, in this case, we've seen people try to distance themselves from Jay. We tried to help him, but he messed himself up basically for his actions. We've seen this time and time again. Ayub, Lucy, Brad, and many others who were there, who've talked about him, or the ones who haven't talked. I think they're the worst, because like I said, I think they're more likely to be involved than the ones that have talked.
On YouTube to sit and create theories, continue to try and find blame in Brad and Lucy with no real evidence whatsoever. You know, for all of these things to be said with no real anything behind them other than the fact that Mark Williams Thomas has just threw some stuff out and everyone's just kind of gone flying for the breadcrumbs.
It's a fairly inaccessible area, and they say that it is highly likely that, of course, if that is Jay Slater, that he would have slipped or fallen accidentally into that area. They now need to recover the...
So this is the video that Mark Williams Thomas had recorded in his car when Jay Slater was found. And obviously in this video, it's not Mark Williams Thomas saying or implying that this was an accident. This is what has been reiterated to him through the media, through the police. I don't know what his actual source was at the time, but it certainly wasn't Mark Williams Thomas. So at this point, I actually don't know what Mark Williams Thomas's point was, because like I said, it had kind of started to die down. You've still got the odd creator, and we know who they are, that are still talking about this and going through the same information. And pretty much a lot of Mark Williams Thomas's videos were repeated in the very beginning for the first few minutes of the stuff we'd already heard, with a new little nugget in it and then some waffle. But in this case, there was just a few creators left kind of talking about this. Now, Mark Williams Thomas has opened a can of worms, and what I suspect is that he just wanted to remain relevant, to be out in the media, and with no forethought of what this might do to this case and those people creating those conspiracy theories. And what we're left with is Mark saying that, oh, I might come back and tell you all the juicy details of this, that and the other. At this point, Mark, it was really irrelevant, because people had actually kind of started to move on and let this case slow down and go quiet, and here you are throwing it back out there to a pack of wolves to rip this case apart again, and now to wait for you to come back with some information that you might have that the police weren't really talking to you, because they weren't talking to anyone. So I'm not kind of sure what information that you think you have from...
Well, look, I think he did talk to Lucy. I did think he talked to Brad and possibly Brandon as well, because like I said, he must have got some information from the friends out there in the early days, and they probably thought he was police. This is what I think personally. And did he have access to this phone? I think that's a big question mark now. If he did they send him the information of the chat, them talking to Jay or messaging Jay, or any video footage of that? You just don't know. We don't know until he brings this documentary out, but I'm surprised he hasn't elaborated on what they actually told him. I'm not asking him to tell us everything, but I'm asking him to sort of give us a bit of thought in this case, to stop people from the guessing game, should I think. I think if he'd been more sort of forthcoming from the start and said, look, I'm going to be right behind this, I think people would have believed in him, but they've given up on him a little bit. This is what I think. The only thing that's going to save him is this documentary, if it has some other information that we don't know. If not, I'm afraid that's going to be the end of him.
The police, obviously we have got the inquest from the coroner, and at this point I'm more inclined to listen to the coroner than I am you. And I haven't said that statement light either. But at this point, Mark, you could have just let this go. You didn't need to come forward. People didn't need to know. We're not entitled to know any of that information.
Yeah, I understand that.
Which hasn't come from the police, because the police were not talking to anybody, including Jay's family. And whatever you have will be just another theory. And probably what you're going to do is you're going to leave that to stir, and then it will go quiet, and then when you need to become relevant again, I guess you're going to come out with this bit of information. My advice would be, mate, don't do it. We don't need to hear it. No one. We are not entitled. The only people that are entitled to that is Warren, Jay's brother Zach, and Debbie. So my advice to you, Mark Williams Thomas, is I would say focus on your new adventure where you've tracked down someone in a dangerous country that you can't get to, because this is probably one of the only people that you've actually managed to track down, if that's true, rather than trying to just throw bread out to the birds and hope that everyone's going to fight over it. to remain relevant. Guys, let me know your thoughts in the comment section, what you think about all of this, what you think about this new video drop, and where we are with this case. Make sure you're following so you don't miss the cases I am talking about, and do make sure you are subscribed to my YouTube channel, After Dark Coffee and Crime.